globe icon and go there, select language interpretation, and then you'll be able to select either English or Spanish and then select mute original audio. Even if you're bilingual, it is very important that you all select a language. Otherwise, you will not be able to speak or say anything, or you cannot hear everything. That's it.
Thank you. So before we begin tonight, what I'd like to do is lay out the framework about how our conversation this evening will be and how we'll proceed. So again, I'd like to thank you for joining us. We're excited to engage with the community and stakeholders in this, what we feel is going to be very educational and informative, and hopefully a spirited conversation about local law enforcement issues, criminal justice reform, and things related to those matters that affect all of us in this Western Slope region. So we'll go over introductions shortly, and I'll let them speak about themselves and their responsibilities. But for now, I would like to share with you that we have with us tonight Sheriff Lou Valerio from Garfield County Sheriff's Department, the 9th Judicial District elected District Attorney Jefferson Chaney, and Glenwood Springs City Administrator Deborah Figueroa. So let me move into how the process will work tonight. I'd like to think that this is going to be a very informal process. We're certainly excited to have people call in or give us some questions, primarily in writing through the internet. We'll entertain those questions, but understand we have a lot of people who have logged on tonight, and if we find that some of their questions are repetitive or redundant, we just might consolidate those into just one question, certainly in the interest of time. What we'd like to do is explain some of the processes that we have here and some of the laws that relegate us in some of those processes. I will go over my personal responsibilities here as your Chief of Police, as will Sheriff Valerio and the DA, Mr. Chaney. So with that, I'll begin with myself. And as your police chief here in Glenwood Springs, my primary duty is certainly the protection of everybody who visits our community and who resides in our community, and all of our patrons and visitors. On a smaller level, I have administrative oversight of the police services and how we deliver those police services, and then deliver those services in cooperation with public policy, which is determined by our elected officials, or as many of you know them as a city council. The administrative functions of the police department are under my responsibility, but we have a command structure, and through that command structure is how we determine the level of service, how we deliver those services, and on what timeline, our response times, and a variety of other things that go into deciding how we'll effectively deliver policing here in Glenwood Springs in the 21st century. So with that, and in no particular order, I'd like to allow Sheriff Lou Valerio to talk a little bit about himself and his responsibilities, and then we'll move on to the district attorney.
Okay, thank you, Chief. So welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're taking an interest in what's going on in the community, and hopefully we'll get some answers as far as law enforcement, what we can do, what we're not able to do, and how the system works from beginning to end. So as the sheriff of Garfield County, in addition to what the chief just described and the responsibilities we have to protect the public, respond to calls, et cetera, there's also numerous statutory requirements of the sheriff. For tonight's meeting, one of the biggest things that we want to discuss is I am, as the law says, the keeper of the jail, and therefore I'm responsible for setting policy, particularly who can or cannot be put in jail based on currently right now some temporary COVID restrictions. I have the responsibility to take care of those inmates, make sure they get to court, make sure that their civil rights are not being violated, and numerous other things. So again, for purposes of tonight, I think it's important for everybody to understand that the sheriff has the sole function of the jail. It's a huge responsibility. It's a very serious responsibility, but that responsibility really falls at my feet. So one of the questions come up that we were that sort of created the need for this town hall was what's going on with the jail and why can't we throw some people in jail? So I want to touch on that real quick if I can. Before COVID, our jail, the Garfield County Jail, was open to all the law enforcement agencies. We didn't distinguish whether they were municipal violations, whether it was a police department, one of my deputies, state patrol, wildlife officers. If somebody violated the law and the criminal code required them to go to jail, then the jail was open. However, because of COVID, and very specifically because of some lawsuits where sheriffs across the country were sued, and those lawsuits were successful because of not being able to meet social distancing requirements, mask issues, et cetera, a lot of sheriffs had to release many inmates across the country, probably hundreds of thousands of inmates. And to prevent really a lawsuit that would affect the residents and the taxpayers of Garfield County, we, the Garfield County Sheriff's Office, along with probably most sheriffs across the state and the country, enacted some restrictions. Basically, unless it's a very serious crime, certain levels of crime, mandatory crimes, that we were going to ask the law enforcement officers to cite release, summons to a court appearance, and things like that. I have every intention of going back to the way it was and opening the jail up so that these guys that are on the street, the police officers out there protecting you, if somebody needs to go to jail, they have a place to take them. There is some legislation that we might talk about later that may make the current restrictions permanent. There's a push out there that says if this has been working for COVID, then it should work all the time. We would argue in law enforcement this isn't working very well, but because of COVID, we had to apply these temporary restrictions. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And are we going to be able to go back to the way things used to be, or are we going to be now restricted by state law in who can be put in jail and for what reasons? So I'll leave it with that as an opener and what my involvement and interest is in this conversation.
Thank you, Sheriff. And with that, I'd like to introduce 9th Judicial District Attorney Jefferson Cheney.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Cheney, and I am honored and humbled and grateful to be the District Attorney for the 9th Judicial District. I'm very thankful that you all are here and participating in this worthwhile discussion. I'd like for it to be a discussion, and that is something that involves two-way communication, and that would be communication from you to help enlighten us about what your concerns are. It will help us understand perhaps blind spots that we have and how we can be better servants to you, and that is our desire. I want to tell you that although I am the district attorney, I'm also a person who is a father and a husband and a member of your community. I have raised my family in this wholesome community, a place that is a destination for many all over the country and perhaps all over the world. And we're blessed to live here. And I share your concerns, obviously, about community safety, about whether our community remains a desirable destination for those to raise families here or to vacation here. Our concerns, obviously, are how we're doing our job in terms of whether we have the ability to perform the job in the way that you expect. And so those expectations have to be measured by the rules that we have to operate within. We are one part of one branch of government. There's three branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. We are all part of the executive branch of government, and there's two other branches of government that play a role in the rules that dictate how we can do our job, that restrict the actions we can take, and also permit those that we can take. It's important to understand that we have to abide our conduct within the scope of those rules, and I'm happy to talk about those in more detail if you have questions. But for the purpose of our discussion tonight, I will tell you that I sit amongst two people here who are heroes in my view. I've known Chief Darris just a short time, but in the short time he's been here, he's assumed leadership over the police department in an absolutely professional manner and has brought Glenwood Springs PD into the 21st century of law enforcement. And I can tell you that I've served with Sheriff Valerio for many years. And both of these individuals are people who I know would not hesitate to run to danger, not just to protect their families, but to protect you and yours. And I just want to make that point and have that a theme of our discussion tonight, because I believe that there is a misunderstanding in some places in our community that law enforcement does not want to respond, does not have the courage to get out there and do their job. That's just simply not true. And I've witnessed it time and time again. So for the purposes of tonight, again, want to thank you for being a part of this conversation, this discussion. Let it be a discussion. It is my goal to hear you and to make sure that I don't have blind spots in how I'm performing the job as district attorney, and to make sure that your voices are heard. And to whatever extent I can do better from your information and that which is conveyed to us tonight, I'm going to do my very best. So thank you so much for being a part of tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney. Well, let me begin by saying that we are very fortunate, and I'll follow on what he just mentioned, that in our region, we're very fortunate to have the level of support for law enforcement that we do. Certainly, there's always going to be some disagreements and some contention about decisions that are made and how those decisions are made, and all three of us will walk through some of that tonight and the protocols behind those decisions. But here we have fantastic community support, and where he talked about people being brave enough and choosing to be in law enforcement, I'll tell you that in my personal experience, coming from a very urban area, that's not always the case because of whatever influences might prevail. Officers can engage in what's called depolicing, where the pressures are so much and the scrutiny is so much that officers are choosing not to be proactive or be members of their community and part of the solution. I do not find that here, and that's something that attracted me and my family to come to the Western Slope from the West Coast, and we couldn't be happier about being here. Like Mr. Cheney said, all of us have families here, and we patronize the same stores and schools and services that we all have here. So all of us have a mutual interest in how successful we are in the community of our safety, in the safety of our community, rather. So let me move on and just talk a little bit about kind of where we're at as a municipal police department, which then will kind of parlay itself into corrections and booking processes, and certainly within the law and where we're able to operate. It's no secret that recently there's been a lot of controversy concerning a particular incident downtown, and I'll let Mr. Cheney speak about that, but we don't want to get into the specifics about that. But for now, I think it's no secret that we had an incident, and some in the community wondered why it was handled a certain way, why it wasn't handled another way, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll tell you that to begin with, and like I said in the local media, we do not encourage vigilantism. That only creates other situations and exposes the people involved, and that's additional liability. So we certainly wouldn't recommend that. We'd always recommend contact law enforcement, remove yourself from a situation perhaps, and let us deal with it. Unless, of course, it's a life-threatening event and you need to do what you feel is best. Nonetheless, where we have situations where we have public nuisance crimes or crimes that involve quality of life, whether that be alcohol in the downtown corridor or anywhere else, people just not following the rules and having decent courtesy to respect other people's space, and the police become involved, the responding officers, number one, understand that we don't have a finite number of police officers. There's only so many that serve the community, typically around 10,000 people, maybe as many as 14,000 permanent residents, and certainly that doesn't include the visiting population. Nonetheless, we have a number of officers, and they might be committed to other calls for service, so the response time might not be what many would like. Having said that, when we do respond to a call, we review the facts as we have in front of us, and then we make a determination about what the best course of action might be. In many cases or many occasions, the disposition for something like that would be in the form of a summons or a citation. A person is not hauled off to jail because of whatever transgression they might have been involved with, but they were issued a citation with a court date, and now they need to see a judge down the road if formal charges are filed and explain their conduct and be held accountable for their conduct. That far exceeds the scope of what the Glenwood Police Department is responsible for. We facilitate that process. We introduce them to the criminal justice system in the form of that summons. Now, as you heard the sheriff talk about, there are limitations about when we can put certain individuals in the county jail. That is through protocols from the sheriff's department, or it's even codified from the state legislature, the legislative branch that Mr. Cheney referred to earlier, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we can only do what we can do within the confines of either the code or what the legislature allows us to do. Just because we're entrusted with a level of authority doesn't mean we can just do whatever we want, whenever we want. So in this most recent case, we felt that the best course of action in compliance with the protocols, the prevailing protocols, were to issue a summons and have that person answer to a judge down the road. The unforeseen consequence of something like that is that certainly the person's right there, or even if they came to the Glenwood Police Department, they have the ability to return back to that scene shortly thereafter and then continue to to be involved in that situation or create additional problems. But again, that's not something that we can regulate. Turns out, within a few days, that person did go back and was involved in another event. And again, we took custody of the person, brought them down, and we're issuing them another summons to appear in court. And if we were given the opportunity to really deal with this in more of a reactive mode, I think we could have handled it a little bit differently. But in this particular case, the other half of the situation sought a protection order from the courts, which is the proper venue. A judge followed that up with a judicial order preventing this suspect in this case from being in that general area. And in very short order, he violated the judge's order. And then that creates a situation where now we need to have a conversation where we work collaboratively with the sheriff's office to interrupt that cycle and find a way to put him in jail until he sees a judge. That has taken its course. So that's the limits of what we can do. If it's a felony case or there's certain kinds of crimes that are involved, domestic violence being one of those are mandatory custody. We have to take the person into custody, and the sheriff's office will accept that person into their jail, COVID or not. Because again, those are relegated through protocols or through just through court orders or through the Colorado revised statutes. So without getting into specific crimes and going down a long list of crimes that require mandatory booking, that kind of lays it out. And then if there are questions, we're certainly happy to talk about that. But with that, I'd like to turn over to the sheriff, and maybe he can expand a little bit about some of those protocols.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, so again, there was the pre-COVID, the current COVID, and what's yet to come. But right now, the protocols, again, as I stated, we have a limited amount of folks that can be brought into jail for more serious crimes. And the way that works really simply is, and I will tell you even quite honestly, prior to COVID, law enforcement agencies in this area have operated for years under sort of a always try to summons and release unless you can't type of process. Now, what I mean by that is a majority of the calls for service that all of us run into are minor crimes, municipal violations, misdemeanors. We obviously see our share of serious crimes as well, and I have several people in my jail awaiting trial on some very serious charges. But with the understanding that people that live in the community and they whether they make a mistake, whether they lash out, whether they do something that violates the law, we consider things such as, what's the current situation? Are they continuing to be a danger? And if they're continuing to be a danger to somebody, then certainly we want to put them in jail where they can, not only they can be safe, but obviously the victim or other people in the community are safe. If they're not a danger, then we look and say, do we know their identity? Well, if somebody's lived in this community for several years, we know their identity. Then we'll look at, do they have a home here? Or do they have a family? And yes, okay, well, now they can go back to their family and then continue with the court process, at the next following court date or whatever. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't get thrown in jail. The one thing that's really important for people to understand, and I don't think it's very clear, is law enforcement at the point of arrest are not in the position to punish. In fact, law enforcement are never in the position to punish. If we allowed our law enforcement officers to punish, then we're going to have basically a police state. So our first objective and our first line of response is always to try to educate the public. Most common scenario is, you're speeding, pull you over, warn you about your speeding. Okay, we've educated you. Okay, the second step in that is if you're not kind of adhering to the education, well, then maybe we need to apply some enforcement. And enforcement is, after your third or fourth warning, we're going to give you, write you a ticket, and now you have to go see a judge. And the final part of that is the courts, not law enforcement, the courts decide what level of punishment. Okay, so that's where we have people in our jail that are both waiting for the process, and those that are punished doing whatever sentence that the judges have decided upon. But it's really important that the public understands when law enforcement responds to something, they don't get to use their subjective, personal feelings about something. They have to look at it a very objective, almost triage type of method, similar to if you were to go to the ER with an injury. Who's hurt more serious, who's not as serious, who waits, who gets more resources. And we have to look at that the same way. Although we certainly probably all have our own opinions and feelings and things that we would like to do to kind of resolve, we have to remain objective. We have to comply with the criminal code and what that allows us to do. And there are several violations out there that right now don't even allow for you go to jail. Traffic violations, a lot of what we call infractions that aren't a jailable offense, even petty crimes are not jailable. So we have to temper who we put in jail and the reasons behind that, but based on a criteria that is consistent, objective, and again, complies with the criminal justice system. I know a lot of people, you know, again, they get angry. And certainly if you're a victim, we understand that your case is the most important case to you. No different than, you know, you cut your arm and you have to go to the ER and you're probably going to have stitches. You're the most important patient. I get that. That makes sense. But the doctor, the ER doctors have to look at that and say, well, the guy that is just in a car crash is more serious than you. You have to wait, and we're going to expend more resources on him. Law enforcement kind of triage a case too and look at this and say, based on the elements of the crime, based on what the criminal code tells us we can or can't do, this is the level of offense we can charge somebody with. And if it's a reason to put somebody in jail as opposed to summon and release, then they will. The more serious the crime, the less likely and the less discretion we have to do that. So if you're dealing with somebody that's committed a, you know, relatively high-level felony, there really is no choice, but they have to go to jail just because of the nature of the crime. But again, what we're seeing is this is the way it currently is. We're going to be seeing more legislation that is either enacting these temporary standards to be put in place permanently, and we're going to see some other things that even make it easier in terms of the person being charged, including prohibiting judges from allowing a monetary bond to be posted. That is, you no longer, you know, put up $5,000 or $10,000 to get out of jail, that you're released on what we call personal recognizance. So maybe in this particular case, even if that person was put in jail, they would almost immediately be getting out on a personal recognizance bond based on the laws that are in place and how those things are done. So kind of the protocol that we deal with here, and not only us, but across the state, across the country, in respect to the criminal justice system and what we can and can't do in there.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Cheney, would you like to opine?
Sure. I'd just like to describe when the DA team gets involved with the case. It is typically once the person makes their first court appearance. There are other occasions where we get involved in terms of collaborating with our law enforcement partners through our on-call phone. Our on-call phone is a phone that's answerable 24 hours a day, and we're open to providing legal advice to law enforcement agencies throughout the 9th Judicial District. But the primary involvement of the DA team is after the person makes their first appearance. I can tell you that it's important to understand the charging process. I think it relates to the incident that has sort of garnered the attention recently, but it's probably a fundamental point to make for our discussion, and that is charging occurs in two primary ways. The first way is through a summons or a ticket. I've gotten a ticket and I've been summoned to court for speeding. And so I was charged by the law enforcement officer on the side of the road, and I was formally charged. So for lower level crimes and traffic offenses, oftentimes those charging decisions are made in the field by the law enforcement officer based on what he or she is observing and based on the evidence gathered. Charging decisions for more serious crimes, such as felonies, are made by the DA team. And that is a decision that amounts to filing a document that spells out the charges at the felony level. And so those are the two primary ways that charges occur. Now, we do trust our law enforcement partners in the field to make those decisions based on what they're seeing, based on the evidence they're gathering, and based on their understanding of the circumstances, since it is, after all, their boots on the ground there at the time. Sometimes, however, those charges get sent to us, and we evaluate the case further and decide other investigation needs to occur and other charges need to be filed. So for the purposes of our discussion tonight, I just want to make sure that I convey that I cannot comment on the case or the individual that has given rise to the recent attention. This case is still under investigation, and I'm prohibited by the rules of professional conduct to talk specifically about that case or the facts. But I can generally talk about that charging process when our team gets involved. And like I said, our team gets involved primarily at the first appearance of an accused person. The last point I'd like to make is that we have to remember, and we can't forget, that the oath that we all take, whether you're a police officer or a district attorney or a prosecutor who's a part of our team, we all take an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Colorado. And those constitutional provisions, those rights that we all have that are spelled out in those constitutions apply equally to all of us. And so the presumption of innocence is one that we all know at heart. We're all taught that from a young age. So when folks are charged either in the field by a police officer or even by a person on our team at the DA's office, we still have to understand and respect that that person is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And those standards are standards that have been in existence longer than anybody who's participating tonight have been alive. And officers make those decisions in the street based on probable cause. However, the DA's office, the DA team has to make charging decisions knowing that the case has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And we take that charging decision seriously. Now, a lot of people want people to spend time in jail at the moment they are alleged to have committed an offense. Well, number one, we have to reconcile that that person is presumed innocent at that stage in the proceeding, and that it is our burden to prove that. So I can tell you that pretrial confinement, pretrial incarceration, or jail is considered pre-conviction punishment, and it is frowned upon by the system, frankly. Most of the time, folks are going to get a bond and they're going to get out of jail almost immediately, at least within the first 24, 48 hours that they're arrested, unless they pose a significant, substantial risk that we can articulate in front of the judge. And so that is really what would happen in most cases. And so for events that occur after a person's been arrested and then they bond, based on what Sheriff Valerio said, getting a personal recognizance bond, nothing prevents that person from immediately walking out of the jail after getting his or her personal belongings and going back to the scene of the crime, even if an order has been issued by the court, or even if that person is now charged with a crime. And law enforcement is there to respond when those things happen. And we're here to prosecute if we can prove that those things happen. And that is our job, and that's a job that we take seriously. So right now there is significant criminal justice reform occurring in Denver down the road in the legislature. And I can tell you that criminal justice reform, if you've been paying attention, has been taking evolutionary steps that I would call not just steps, but leaps. And we now have bond reform. Sheriff Valerio touched upon that, where a judge's ability to impose a bond is now limited in certain circumstances where before it wasn't. There's a bill that's being introduced just this week or last week in the legislature, and the title of the bill is Concerning Measures to Reduce Jail Populations. So you can see the paradigm and the perspective and the focus of our legislature is to minimize the amount of people who are in jail. Now, I think a lot of us may have strong opinions about that, and a lot of us may have strong opinions about the consequences of that on public safety. I certainly do. But these are the rules that we have to conform our behavior to. And sometimes we don't agree with the rules, but we are to uphold the rules. And our oath is to defend and protect the constitutions of the state of Colorado and the United States. And so I hope that'll explain, at least from my perspective, how our team is involved. We do share your concerns about public safety because, as I said, we live here too. We raise our family here too.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney. So with that, I'd like to see if we have, and it does appear that we have several questions. So if it's all right, we'll go ahead and move into some of those questions and kind of address them as we can.
So the first question is not necessarily related to some of the incidents maybe that you've been addressing, but it says, I live over on Park Drive around the corner from the high school. I'm curious if the local police ever set up speed traps along Park Drive, as we tend to have a lot of people, students, school buses especially, that seem to like to speed along Park Drive.
So there's a little interference there, but I understand the questions referencing speeding enforcement or speed enforcement around the high school in that Park neighborhood there, Park Drive neighborhood. And I think I'll speak to that. Well, I'm a little cautious to ever use the language of speed trap. I prefer to use speed enforcement. Like the sheriff mentioned, there are typically 3 components to contacts, enforcement being the second, education being our first choice of action. And certainly where juveniles are concerned, I think there's a lot of room for education there. But if the conduct is egregious enough and it deserves a citation, then we're certainly willing to take it there. In my tenure here in Glenwood Springs, we have not had any directed enforcement in the neighborhood that you're referring to, just south of the high school. I've received several inquiries about speed or traffic enforcement in the Grand Avenue neighborhood. And again, I'll go back to the amount of police officers that we have in our community and the level of activity that they have, their ability to balance responding to calls in progress. We prioritize those calls by life safety, threats to life and safety, their people's personal safety. And that's, of course, our first priority. Secondarily, we respond to property crimes. And then when the officers have available free patrol time, that's when they would engage in foot patrols, meeting with school children, or speed enforcement, or what have you. So direct answer to your question is no, we have not, since I've been here, had directed enforcement in that neighborhood. Doesn't mean that we can't, but I would ask you to have some patience with us and understand that the amount of officers that we have and the call volume that we do balance, it does take some careful consideration when we look at those different things. And I don't want to dismiss your question or imply that it's not important. Traffic safety is important, and that's usually the main question that we get in these types of town hall environments. It's usually surrounding traffic enforcement. So anyway, hopefully that's satisfactory and it answers your question. Thank you.
The next question is, has your department done any programs or refresher training in the subject of recognizing personal biases, and how do you dissociate those from their work?
I'm assuming you're referring to the Glenwood Springs Police Department. I'll let the sheriff talk about his department. So we all, as members of the Colorado Peace Officer Standards and Training, do receive quite a bit of training each year. Specifically, the Glenwood Springs Police Department is involved in a considerable amount of training that I'm very proud of. And I would say that we have had sensitivity training, de-escalation training, racial bias training, implicit bias, sometimes they call that. And some of this was outlined in President Obama's report on 21st Century Task Force Policing. And that's one of the pillars that they talk about. I'm aware of the document. We've gone through it, and I think that we conform to many of those principles within that document. And we also have to conform, of course, with the Colorado Post standards. Sheriff?
Yeah, I would echo that as far as all of the training required by the state. And then one of the things that we're proud of is the Colorado requires us to have 24 hours of what's called in-service training that address those topics, as well as a variety of other things, including what we call skills, shooting, driving, arrest control. But in our organization, we're able to do in-house, or what we call in-service training, anywhere between 80 to 96 hours a year, depending on some of the months and around Christmas and things like that. That doesn't include all the training we send to people outside of the agency to pick up additional training and bring back to the organization. So I think we're well versed in that. Are there opportunities, of course, to do more when it comes to community awareness and sensitivity training and bias? Absolutely. But we certainly are complying with the law and way above that too. So.
This question is for Mr. Cheney. Can you explain about protection orders, please, civil orders, and when are some people arrested or charged or not if people are afraid of someone? Question mark.
Those are a series of really good questions, and I'll just start from the beginning. A protection order can be obtained by a person who feels that another endangers their safety, the safety of their family, and they can pursue a restraining order either through a civil request that is made of our local county courts, and there is a petition for a temporary restraining order. We call that a TRO. And if the court feels that the initial pleading, the document filed by the petitioner, is containing substantial information that creates a risk to the safety of the petitioner or their family, the court will typically grant that temporary restraining order. However, that's just temporary. The court will then set that matter for a hearing to determine whether that protection order, that temporary restraining order, should be made permanent. And it is at that hearing that is where the full rights of the person are honored in terms of the person being able to confront the evidence initially presented by the petitioner and to challenge that evidence to argue that that restraining order should not be made permanent. So there's the civil protection order. Then there's the criminal protection order, and that is found in 18.1.1001 of our Colorado Revised Statutes. And in every criminal case in which a victim has been harmed, as long as that person is appearing before a court, and that is essential, a judge is the only person who can issue a protection order under the criminal procedure. That person has to appear in front of the judge. And in cases where there are victims who've been harmed, in our system, as long as they appear before one of our judges, a restraining order is requested always. We do this all the time, every day, when people are brought. As I said, our involvement is at the first appearance of that person. And it is typically at that first appearance that we'll be asking the court to issue a protection order under the criminal procedure. I think the next question you asked would be, when does charging occur? Did I read that right, Jen? Could you repeat the second part of that? I want to make sure I'm responsive to that.
When are some people arrested or charged or not?
Okay. So the arrest can only be made if there's probable cause. And an arrest has to be based on probable cause, and that means that an ordinary, reasonable, prudent person would believe that it is more likely that the crime was committed and it was committed by the person accused. That is a decision that can be made in the field by a police officer. And that is a decision that bears on the judgment of the officer at the time, determining whether he or she has probable cause. Sometimes that is a decision that just can't be made at that time because the evidence is insufficient. So in that particular case, perhaps the officer may choose not to make an arrest, because remember, an arrest can only be made if probable cause exists. Another way that an arrest can occur is that if we go to a court and ask for approval, and that is official approval granted by the court through an arrest warrant, and that requires the court to review an affidavit sworn under oath by the officer, and that judge finds probable cause. In other words, it's not up to the officer to make that decision. We are passing that to the other branch of government, the judicial, and the judicial officer, the judge, is saying, I agree you have probable cause and I command you to arrest this person. Those are the two ways and the only two ways a person can be arrested. And so most of the time, we would prefer that arrest, and look, an arrest of a person is a significant step whereby the government is exercising control over that person and depriving them of their liberty. And so it's a big decision to make. So most of the time, we would prefer to have an arrest warrant approved by a court. But we realize that public safety, the circumstances don't always lend to that decision being delayed. And it is at that time that the officer has to make the call. And like I said, sometimes making the call means making the call to me and my team through our on-call phone, and then we collaborate and come to some decision point in terms of whether probable cause exists. But that's the only way that arrests occur. Typically, when we're involved with the arrest decision, again, we are recognizing the burden of proof that we have as prosecutors is much greater than that which the officer has on the street, beyond a reasonable doubt is a substantially higher burden than probable cause. So we're typically applying ourselves to a stricter, more higher burden of proof when we're involved in that decision. I hope that answered your question, but I'm happy to make sure.
There's a couple of questions that are related to officers or uniformed officers or security being downtown. So I'm going to kind of read both. One says, having the extra security guards and police patrols downtown this weekend made a huge difference in the safety and security of downtown. There were lots of families and tourists having a wonderful time laughing and enjoying our downtown core. We haven't seen this safe and fun since the bridge and Bethel Plaza were built. Can we keep the extra security daily? And then there's a question asking why, with the Glenwood Springs Police Department numbers, can't you have 2 to 4 uniformed officers walking the downtown core?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm glad you brought that up. So let me begin by saying the addition of security officers down there has been a blessing for us with the added presence and the visibility for a function of law enforcement. Their primary function there is to observe and report what they see to sworn police officers. We have to thank our city council for finding the funding to support a security team down there, but I don't know that that's sustainable over a long period of time, and that's not a decision I would make. You have to understand that with those services, there is an expense attached to that. So we're glad to have them, and we think that they provide a valuable function there, and they've been effective at what they do. But as you talk about police officers and supplanting those security forces with police officers or complementing those forces, I have to tell you that, and you mentioned the numbers of Glenwood Springs police officers we have. We actually do not have a large number of Glenwood Springs police officers. We are budgeted, we have a number that we're budgeted for sworn officers in this city, and we are not there. And since I've been here, we have not been there. We've actually had a shortage of officers. We're in a deficit for police officers, and I don't think that we're unique from any other law enforcement agency really in the nation. If you were to Google search law enforcement recruiting, you'll find many, many publications concerning the inability of agencies to recruit solid police officers or police officer candidates, and we're no exception. I personally would rather not lower our standards just to be able to fill patrol cars out on the street and end up subjecting us maybe later on to litigation or lawsuits because of lack of quality officers that we're hiring. So in that regard, garbage in, garbage out kind of analogy. I want to make sure that the people we're hiring are solid, vetted police officers. And I'm sure, and I don't want to speak for the sheriff, but I'm sure he feels the same way. And so we don't have all the officers that we currently are authorized for in Glenwood Springs. My preference would be to have 2 sworn officers downtown at the peak points of every day or every weekend. That's just not feasible with the amount of hours we're asking the guys and gals to work here in our department, overtime, court, et cetera, and then ask them to come in on overtime. It's just unreasonable because we don't have the numbers that we need. And there's a variety of reasons for that. So very recently, we've actually even supplemented the security team that you have seen downtown with additional officers. But again, that comes with an additional cost, which I think the city is happy to bear as long as it's productive and it's providing the function that it's designed for. So with that, again, I don't want to speak for the sheriff, but I'll let him speak about his department.
Yeah, and again, what the chief said is really true. Law enforcement across the country is suffering from being shorthanded, trying to get quality people to join the ranks. There's numerous reasons for that. Most recently, some of the things that are going on in the public and concerns about, even wanting to get into the profession of law enforcement. At the Garfield County Sheriff's Office, I will give you, for example, we have been, in the past couple of years, significantly shorthanded. Out of an organization of 140 people, and that's from me all the way up the line, we were down as many as 26 positions. And again, some of those maybe administrative, but mostly deputies in the jail and on patrol. So it took us a long time. It took us over a year to replace those positions. In fact, last year we hired a total of 36 new people just in the year 2020 because of our vacancies. And so it's difficult to kind of keep ahead of that. it's difficult to maintain that. But even at fully staffed, you still have to consider the ratio. So in Garfield County, our patrol division, our law enforcement guys on the street, they respond and are responsible for people who live in unincorporated Garfield County, not in one of the 6 towns. And that's about half of our population, or about 30 people. So our sworn uniformed personnel, the guys, again, the patrol officers, their supervisors, that's a ratio of about 1 deputy to every 1,000 residents. Now, if you take that and you say, well, we run 4 different shifts, now we're talking about 1 deputy for every 4,000 residents. So clearly, you know, the numbers are spread thin, even when we're fully staffed. What we did a few years ago at the sheriff's office is we did employ some private security to really supplant some of our positions. So if you've ever been to the courthouse in Glenwood Springs or in Rifle, you'll see that we have private security guys that run the metal detectors and provide security in various places in those buildings. That was not only because of the difficulty of hiring deputies to fill those spots, but it's also a financial decision where we can contract with a private security company for a much better rate than what it would cost us to hire somebody when you include all the benefits and other things that we have to pay them. So we have private security, not only in the courtrooms, we also have them embedded in our jail, and they work side by side with detention deputies doing whatever it is that, you know, we train them and show them what to do. And again, that was kind of a budgetary thing as well. But the difficulty of maintaining law enforcement in today's day and age is difficult at best. I would argue there's very few organizations out there that are fully staffed, and if they are fully staffed, they're not fully staffed for very long.
With regard to private property, would you recommend a restraining order after an incident? And then when is the line crossed with private property and trespassing?
I think that's a question that I can take a stab at. So any person who has a legal justification to seek a protective order from the court can petition the court for a protection order. The court is going to evaluate the circumstances and the strength of the allegations that that person is in fear or has a legitimate concern for their safety of themselves and their business. And I think in that case, a judge could in fact issue a protection order. With respect to private property that invites people to patron, to commence business, you know, it's difficult to trespass a person the first time to that establishment, because you're basically, as a business person, inviting the public in to come and patron that business. But I do firmly believe that businesses can, at some point, trespass a person. And when we say trespass a person, say, you know, you are no longer welcome here, and we are no longer are going to permit you to be here as an invitee onto the property. And at that particular point, then there may be probable cause, if the person were to come back, that the person is committing a trespass, even without a protection order. So I don't think that getting a protection order hinges on whether it's public property or private property necessarily. It really hinges on the harm that is articulated by the person who seeks that protection order. And again, I'm talking about a civil protection order. And remember, there were 2 types, civil and criminal. For a criminal protection order, it's automatic. The law requires it. So once a person is arrested and there is a named victim, the law requires the court to issue a protection order under the statute that I cited. And so there's really no argument or debate about it. And so that is a protection order, however, that only lasts through the evolution of the criminal case. So that's why oftentimes we encourage victims also to go and get a civil protection order. Because again, if that civil protection order is made permanent, then that will exist conceivably into the far future, long after the criminal case is complete. So I hope I answered those 2 questions.
I'd like to entertain our own question, if I might, more for the sheriff and for the benefit of our audience. So, Sheriff, let's say, for example, we have an individual who comes into a business, they've been asked to leave a couple of different times, Glenwood PD comes out, and we take custody of the person. In your experience, has it been customary for us to issue them a summons, and which is one option as we discussed earlier, or is that somebody that you'd want to accept into your jail currently, even now under the prevailing protocol conditions?
You know, I would say traditionally, again, going back to that kind of summons and release sort of theory, is that probably at least the first time, you'd take them into custody, remove them, issue them a summons for the trespass. You've been warned, you're not allowed back in there. And then again, they have the opportunity to comply with that or not comply with that. If they, respond again or return again with the trespassing, then again, that might warrant, as I talked about before, education first and enforcement second. So yeah, as a general rule, I would say in the first episode, we would say, here's a summons for trespassing. Understand too, trespassing is a very minor violation. It's a class 3 misdemeanor. There's a couple of exceptions, but mostly it's a class 3 misdemeanor, which is just one step above what we call a petty offense. So in that scale that we keep talking about, you can see what the level is in terms of the seriousness of that. So that would be what we would probably do as a first attempt rather than scoop them up and take them straight to jail. And then if I can, I just kind of like to chime in, even with that, where maybe there's a restraining order added or a protection order. Everybody needs to understand that, a protection order, it's a piece of paper. It's essentially a warning from a judge telling somebody, hey, you're already in trouble and you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this. We hope they'll comply. They don't always. So I'm going to say at best 50-50 that they may or may not comply. But then at that point, there's an additional charge of violating a protection order, and gets more serious as you go along. But the reality is, it's a protection order. It's an order from a court. We can't handcuff somebody to the piano because we think they might violate it. We can't, keep them in jail because they think they might violate it. We can't arrest anybody because we think they might commit a crime. If we did, we need a much bigger jail than what we have now. So again, it's part of the process and part of the system. It's frustrating, but it's a system of really graduating to, levels of criminal conduct that warrant more and more serious consequences from the courts.
So this is the chief and sheriff. What expertise does your department have to address incidents involving a person in mental health crisis?
Let me start?
Sure.
So I will tell you at best, law enforcement in general, we go through a lot of training and a lot of awareness dealing with people with mental illness. There's training which is actually coming up right now. It's called CIT training, critical incident critical incident team training. It's a 40-hour course which teaches us how to deal with people with mental illness, and here's why. We know more and more, day by day, we deal with more people that have mental illness. And unfortunately, oftentimes they act out criminally because there's no other avenue for them. It doesn't make them criminals. It makes them people with mental illness who have acted out criminally. And so we try to account for that, and we try to de-escalate, and we try to work with that. We actually have a program now where it's called a co-responder program, where we have crisis counselors that either ride with us or are available within a very brief period of time, maybe 20 minutes, that will respond to the scene with us to deal with those things, because they're the people that are the experts. They're the ones that have chosen counseling and dealing with crisis and mental illness as their profession. Law enforcement officers' profession is criminal law and protection and dealing with crimes, and not our chosen profession to be mental health crisis. But we deal with those folks on a regular basis, so we have to be trained in that. So I would say our training is adequate, but certainly not at the professional level as a crisis counselor can. So when we see programs where we have opportunity to get a crisis worker there at the scene with us to be able to deal with it with their toolkit, which is much larger than what our toolkit is in that, that's a good thing. I will tell you though that oftentimes, and like I said before, out of fear frustration, that folks eventually wind up acting out criminally and wind up in jail when they don't belong there. We talk about, relocating funds or defunding police or whatever. We've contributed and moved money out of my budget to programs like this co-responder program, because anything we can do to keep people out of jail and get the services they need rather than, wait for them to act out criminally, that's a good thing. And we're all for that, and we support that. So a combination of training and a combination of administrative functions and decisions, we do what we can to deal with that. I'll also tell you that probably on average right now across the country, whether it's a jail or a state prison or federal prison, we're seeing in excess of 60% of our inmates have some type of mental illness, some very severely. We had one inmate who was so severely mentally ill in our jail that eventually he was there longer than what he could have even been sentenced to had he gone to trial and been convicted. So the district attorney and the courts and I were actually able to get those charges dismissed and get him moved to a mental health hospital where he could get the treatment he needed. He wasn't a criminal. He just acted out criminally, and then he winds up in the criminal justice system where he doesn't belong. So we're becoming more and more familiar with recognizing that. We're providing additional services and providing additional law enforcement, if nothing else, as a tool in their toolbox to say, hey, recognize these symptoms and these issues.
I'll be brief and explain the Glenwood Springs Police Department's posture. I'll refer to CIT as well. A matter of fact, next month, we're hosting the CIT 40-hour program here at Glenwood Springs. We've invited other law enforcement agencies in our region to come and be a part of that, participate in that training with our partners. I'll agree that we are nowhere near subject matter experts in people in mental crisis or mental health issues or suffering from those, the effects of that, to the point where now we've engaged and we've taken significant steps in de-escalation tactics, the tools that we have and the training that we have. So we're able to kind of walk these things back a little bit where we don't find ourselves in a situation where we're forced to use force or apply force. These people need medical assistance or psychiatric assistance, and law enforcement officers are just not the avenue for that. Unfortunately, society has now kind of shifted to relying on law enforcement to solve much of society's ills, homelessness being one of those. And because we're 24 hours, there's really nobody else to call. And when we arrive on scene and we find somebody in crisis, they're not real excited to see us, and then we're there under unfavorable circumstances. And sometimes, luckily it hasn't happened here, they put us in a situation where the officer has to defend themselves or defend other people in the area. And that's where you see this high level of violence between the interactions of somebody in mental crisis and law enforcement. And so we're trying to do everything we can, whether it's through our tools and the training that we have, or to our understanding, or trying to educate folks in the community about really the limitations of your law enforcement professionals. We have a lot of training in a lot of different subjects, but it doesn't make us the experts, certainly, in this environment, in this arena.
So I don't want to shy away from, there are a couple of questions that are critical of the police department, and I just want to read parts of them. Why is the Glenwood Springs police chief not on foot in person walking the beat? Why is he not in person in the businesses every day? You're spending millions of dollars and we cannot have a police presence. A couple of questions kind of in that vein about, you know, who can be downtown, and why specifically is the police chief not downtown?
Well, thank you for that. I will take exception with that question because I am downtown. Matter of fact, today I had lunch at the Grind. I'm downtown with not just me and my partners or even my family, on at least a couple of occasions every single week or weekend night. We patronize the businesses regularly. During the daytime, I don't have the time to be down there all of the time because that's not, number one, it's not one of my regular duties because I'm called to training or presentations or meetings such as this, or meeting with homeless task forces or folks in the mental health arena. And, you know, my time is very limited in talking with civic groups or schools or school district personnel, you name it. It ranges, there's a wide variety there. So the demands of my time are quite high. And I would, again, say that if you're looking carefully, you'll see me. I'm down there quite often, if not once every day, a couple of times throughout the week, even on my personal time.
Can I add to that? Jen,
Sure.
Can I add to that?
Of course.
And again, I don't need to defend the police chief, but one of the things you have to understand, and again, it's probably relative to organizational size, but just like me, certainly at the sheriff's office, I have 140 employees. So I really am a CEO of a $20 million a year organization with 140 employees. I've moved up from being a street cop. And do you really want to pay me the salary you pay me to be a street cop? Or do you want me to be the person running, the organization at the helm and, directing and enabling and all that. So I think at some point you have to realize that there's a cost benefit analysis to this as well as, police chief, a sheriff, whatever. And that their function is to run the organization, to delegate, to make sure things are done, and not necessarily, just patrol. I certainly don't have time to patrol. Am I out there in the community? Absolutely. Of course, I have the entire county that I have to make sure that I attend. I go to the restaurants and patronize businesses and everything as well. But I think part of that is people need to understand that, again, there's a position for everybody in an organization. They're all equally important. But what I do as a sheriff is different than what one of my deputies does on the street, but yet his job just as important as mine. But I don't do his job and he doesn't do my job. So I hope that makes sense.
Can the chief discuss the Vail Fund and parameters, and does GARCO have anything similar?
Did I hear it, the Vail Fund?
Yes, the Vail Fund.
I can talk about that in very limited terms. I am aware that it is there. As a matter of fact, just this afternoon, we got a request for several $1,000s from the Vail Fund. I'm told that the board, we are kind of in a stagnant position right now because of lack of participation and lack of a number of people there, so we can hold a quorum to determine where the funds go. And the pool for funds is really diminished significantly over the last several years because a number of nonprofit organizations have approached the Vail board to discuss their needs and really an opportunity for us to prioritize where those funds go. And so we're in a situation now, we're almost at a zero balance budget in the Vail Fund because of the increasing needs of different organizations in the community. This one today, the request that we got today laid out in specific terms, the amount of increases by percentages of services that they've been providing. And so there's a need for many thousands of dollars that we probably aren't going to be able to honor. But that's not a decision that I make. I don't run the Vail board. I know that we participate and have personnel on that board. But that'd be the extent of information I could provide at this point, unless one of you gentlemen has additional information.
I think there's two sources of funding that are set up and established for victims. The first is Vail. That's a victim's assistance from law enforcement. And the second is VOCA, which is Victims of Crime Act funds. These funds have tremendously dropped in value in terms of what is being dispersed to the judicial districts across our state and across the country, frankly, because some of these funds come from federal grants issued by Department of Justice. These funds are there also to be funded by fees and costs assessed against offenders. And so those have drastically reduced as a result of not being imposed at the time of sentencing, and as also decisions that are made to divert some of those funds away from our local agencies that serve victims. Part of the Vail and the VOCA funding does go into a fund called Crime Victim Compensation, and that is a fund that is administered by a board that is dispersed based on an application of a person who has been harmed from a crime. And sometimes that means that the person can articulate exactly what harm they suffered, and it was proximately caused by the offender. And sometimes those funds are even dispersed when charges can't be filed because the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt when there was probable cause that a crime was committed. But that's just what I could add to the discussion about those funds.
As far as the sheriff's office, we don't have a Vail board. And if I'm not mistaken, the one like at the city is at least in part funded through municipal fines and fees and surcharges. So the city has what's called the municipal code, a local crime code, if you will, where a lot of those things, they go to municipal court. There's surcharges, there's fees or fines that might populate that Vail fund for the Vail board that's at the city. We don't have that. We don't have a municipal code. Everything we do is under state code. So those funds go into another pot of money, as the district attorney described, and then are dispersed back or managed through the 9th Judicial District, or even in some cases the commissioners and how they choose to allot those funds.
I can add that if it's like a nonprofit organization, kind of like the one I described earlier, we do have a venue for that. They can ask through the city, through FAB funds, contact the city, and we can walk them through that process and then kind of vet that out as well. That's another opportunity as well.
The grant process is coming open probably in April. So
In April, so another couple of months, that process will be open. Is there a period when that closes?
Yeah, it's a couple of weeks process, and the Financial Advisory Board goes through applications and makes recommendations to City Council on a variety of nonprofits. But this would seem to be a pretty good, if they're helping victims of crimes, I'm sure it would be looked upon competitively.
Fair enough, thank you.
It says, Chief, you have an academy here at CMC and ideas could be bounced around for a better presence. Has this been investigated?
I'm sorry, I caught the part about do we have an academy and what else?
Chief, you have an academy here at CMC and ideas could be bounced around for a better presence. Has this been investigated?
I'm gathering you mean like use it as a source for recruiting and hiring. I'm assuming that's what the intention of the question is. So yes, we do have an academy there. We participate in that quite heavily. We have a number of our staff that are adjunct professors there, instructors at the police academy. Since I've been here, I've been up there on a handful of different times, taking presentations or teaching classes. And so it is a candidate pool for us. But again, we're not the only agency that contributes to that academy. It's a regional academy. So other agencies, it's a competitive process, are going to go there and try to recruit those same students. But many of the students that are there are already hired by police agencies, and so there's very few who are not sponsored or non-affiliates or people that are putting themselves through. Those numbers are very, very few. But we are aware of that, and we have done quite a lot here at Glenwood Springs anyway in our efforts to recruit folks, whether that's through the radio, broadcast media, television, or newspaper ads, our Facebook page. I mean, you name it. We've been trying to be very innovative on how we approach recruiting efforts to maintain the staffing that we need to have a safe and effective police force. Okay.
Yeah, and absolutely ditto. We're involved in there, and we have staff that teaches there. I used to teach quite a bit of hours up there years ago. And like the chief said, although we are certainly arm in arm when it comes to law enforcement in the community, we're very competitive when it comes to those people that are available to join our profession. In fact, it's not uncommon that we might occasionally steal somebody from another agency and vice versa, and go around the horn, so to speak. So having the academy here is a great asset. The option there is we have to send our folks best case scenario to Grand Junction, which oftentimes adds to the expense associated with that. So we're really grateful the academy's here. We're grateful that a majority of those adjunct professors and instructors and everything are from our local law enforcement agencies in the Valley. So the folks that are there are either sponsored by our agencies or hoping to be employed by an agency are getting sort of our brand of law enforcement, if you will, in terms of our community, our rural, setting, our way of life, our all those things that go along with living in this area that we live in.
So this one, again, more, I think, a little bit of criticism. Is the Downtown Methodist Church a homeless shelter? Is this why there's such a big homeless presence in the downtown area?
Well, let me begin before I even answer the question. When we talk about people are critical of our services or how we've performed or whatever, I'm very happy to hear about opportunities where we might be better. And so that's the exact reason why we have these types of conversations, and the city's gone out a long ways to host these kinds of platforms for folks to talk to us and share their concerns with us. So I don't take these as criticisms. I really take these as opportunities for us to do better because I don't know where all the opportunities, where they all exist. And certainly we're not perfect. We're everybody's neighbors and friends and sons and daughters. So we do make mistakes like anybody else. With a little more specificity on the Methodist Church, I cannot speak to them in particular, but I can tell you that various nonprofit or faith-based organizations in our community, in our region, offer services to folks who are homeless or challenged by substances or whatever their plight might be. And so these different organizations offer a handout or a hand up, whether it's food or clothing or what have you. Being the largest city in the county, I think we have probably the most amount of resources here. I don't know that to be a fact. It's not scientific. That's just my feeling. And so a number of folks do come here to seek out those services for their own self-preservation. Certainly within the winter months, it's a challenge to live here and be outdoors, I would imagine. So I don't want to single out the Methodist Church or Catholic Charities or whoever it might be, because there's a number of them here that do find their mission in helping people who might need a handout or hand up again, some charity.
What is the legal stipulation to live in a tent on public land? Why is this allowed to happen?
Let me try to field that one. It's not that simple. So public lands, you could talk specifically about public lands within the city limits, and I'd defer that to the chief. But one of the things that we see from the county level is we have folks that are living, sleeping in tents, camping, whatever, on public lands in terms of like BLM and Forest Service, right? Because the county doesn't own any property per se that are public lands. They're all probably, you know, federal lands that we deal with. In fact, Garfield County, I think, is 64% federal land. So again, not trying to speak out of turn and speak for the federal agencies that manage those. The general rule of thumb is whether you go to a structured campground at, you know, Trappers Lake, or you just pitch your tent out in the middle of nowhere, is there's a 14-day limitation on somebody camping. I think it's really more intended for environmental issues and, you know, not destroying the, you know, the grasses and all that around, and, you know, pack up, move on, and allow things to regenerate. But what's been made clear by those agencies to us is there's a difference between camping being you live in town, you pack up the family, you go camping for a few days or even for 2 weeks, and people that are residing on that property. And residing on that property, according to the federal government, is always illegal because it's never been intended for them to take up residence on those properties for 14 days or 12 days or 1 day. It's intended to apply to people that are temporarily using our public lands. So in the terms of camping, there's usually a 14-day limitation out there, but in terms of residing is actually prohibited.
The city of Glenwood Springs, we're a home rule city, so we have the ability to legislate and create laws that affect our city specifically. And we do have no camping ordinances in the downtown core area and different areas, and there are maps available and there's signage downtown. A little more globally speaking, and I'll refer this to the district attorney, there have been several U.S. Supreme Court or court decisions. One I'm familiar with, the Boise decision. They talk about you cannot outlaw homelessness. So there are some people who can't afford to buy a home, or for whatever reason they find themselves in that situation. It's not unlawful to be homeless, and so we just can't go around arresting everybody that's homeless, even though the way they conduct themselves or their lifestyle might be offensive to some, or unsightly, or an eyesore, whatever kind of label you want to put on it. It's not the police's job to go and take away their freedom and their liberties guaranteed to them by the Constitution because somebody doesn't like that situation. So more specifically on the law, I'm really not the person to talk about that. I think the district attorney's office might be better positioned for that.
I think that camping on public lands, we would first have to identify what public land is it. Is it a federal property, federal public land, or does it belong to another governmental agency? Each governmental agency has rules relative to how long you can stay, whether your intent there is to permanently reside, and those rules can be enforced. If, however, those rules are federal and the land upon which the person is camping is federal, then that is outside of the scope of our authority to enforce or even to prosecute. Obviously, any camping on private property without the permission of the owner is defined as a crime of trespass. And so, you would want to distinguish where the camping is occurring, who owns the land, and what rules apply. If it's public, you'd want to see if it's a federal property. If it's a private, obviously, we could look at the trespass statutes. But as Chief Dare said, you can just do a glimpse into the constitutional law throughout the United States and find that the courts have repeatedly said that homelessness is not in and of itself per se a criminal act. You cannot criminalize homelessness. But what we can do is enforce the laws that are on the book in terms of the criminal code, and then if Glenwood Springs or another municipality has its own municipal code, those code provisions can also be enforced.
So again, there's a couple more questions or kind of criticisms, and I'll just read these last two. If between Glenwood and Garfield cannot put 4 officers walking the downtown, we need to remove them, replace them. There are 3 sitting at the table and not enforcing the laws. If you as the CEO can't do this, or send someone to do this, and fundamental change needs to occur. And then how many police work for Glenwood Springs, and why can you not place 5 officers on the ground out of your cars in our business engine? This apologist, I'm not at fault nonsense is not solving our problems.
Can I jump on that first and answer my half? So as the sheriff's office, you need to understand that although we work side by side, hand in hand, constantly back each other up, protect, we are not an extension of the local police department. Not Glenwood, not Carbondale, Newcastle, Silt Rifle, or Parachute. They have their own police departments, their own policies, their own practices, okay? Also, Garfield County is 3,000 square miles. So I have deputies out there that are required to be in those areas, be in those, positions, to cover 3,000 miles. The same question might be asked by somebody who lives in Rifle. Hey, Sheriff, why don't you have deputies walking downtown Rifle or Parachute or Newcastle or Silt? And the bottom line is that's not in our sandbox, so to speak, as far as what the sheriff's office is responsible to do as far as patrol and provide enforcement. We will always assist the local agencies. We all assist each other in this community, but that's not our primary responsibility. Our primary responsibility is to make sure that we're patrolling and maintaining those people that live in the unincorporated parts of county and responding to those needs.
Well, I'll tell you, and I don't know that anybody's going to accept this response, and it's certainly not an apologist, it's reality. The city only has so much money and can only go so far with the amount of resources that the taxpayers and residents here demand that we provide, whether that's through parks, firefighters, the sewer system, roads, whatever it is. We have a certain amount of money that needs to be stretched over all the departments to provide the services that our community demands. Specifically with law enforcement, let's say, for example, when I got here, we had about 20 police officers for the city of Glenwood Springs, 20 cops. So when you take away, and I'll refer back to the earlier question, somebody's asking, why can't you have police officers out here doing directed enforcement for traffic? We have an officer over there doing that. That takes away from an officer being able to respond to calls that are coming into the 911 center. We have an officer in the school. We have 3 detectives investigating serious felony crimes, whether those or most of them are sexual assault related crimes, child abuse, what have you. You can find out that very, very quickly, trying to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you run out of staff very, very rapidly. That's why in our budget we have overtime provided for officers that have to come into court on their days off. People are sick, particularly with COVID. We have officers that could be exposed, are going to be out for extended period of time. Officers who are on injured duty. And so when you have those people who are not there, we have to bring officers off of their days off to fill those gaps. They have families too. We just don't have the amount of officers available to go and spend time or committed patrol time downtown or to any particular neighborhood because of the number of types of calls, response times, everything I've explained. I'd be very happy to have a conversation with anybody who has a better idea of how our deployment schedule might look. And I'll tell you further that we are considering looking at a staffing study to look at the processes we have, which considers the amount of available free patrol time we have, which is typically assigned by the City Council. The International Association of Chiefs of Police generally recommend a period of time of about 33% of an officer's day is dedicated to free patrol time, which might be report writing, taking phone calls, those types of things, administrative tasks, in addition to calls for service. Whatever the council decides is an appropriate amount of time, that's what we try to fit in those deployment schedules and the hours of the day that they work, looking at our peak times or peak demand times of the day. And then you have to factor into vacations and whatever else you might have. So with 20 cops on the street or available to us, we just aren't able to satisfy all these different needs or requirements that our community demands, unless they decide we're going to close. And I certainly wouldn't suggest this, but let's say we're going to close a community center. We don't want to pay for that anymore. We're going to buy a bunch more cops, or we're going to close down. We're not going to fix the roads anymore, because that money has to come from somewhere. And so being good partners in the city, we have to share those resources and try to provide the best public safety model in cooperation with our community that we possibly can.
I would just like to say that obviously fundamental change has been occurring. right under our noses, fundamental change has been occurring, and it's been occurring in our legislatures across the United States. Just 3 or 4 months ago, the whole narrative was that you couldn't even say that Blue Lives Matter. You were immediately attacked for defending police officers and the integrity of those that do the job overwhelmingly right. And so what this lends itself to is not only a recruiting problem that existed prior to the current narrative, but you just think about, do you want one of your family members going into law enforcement? The legislative changes that have been aimed at taking away a police officer's qualified immunity, meaning that that police officer's personal assets are now in the poker game for the decision-making that officer has to make, and not even underestimating the stress and the anxiety of the job to run to danger rather than away from it. I'll say it again, just like I said at the beginning, we're willing to enforce the law, and we would agree that if you fundamentally believe that we fundamentally do not want to enforce the law, then by all means, fundamental change needs to occur. But I can tell you that that fundamental change has been occurring, and it's been occurring in the way of minimizing the respect for law enforcement, minimizing the protections that law enforcement has. And if you've ever led an organization, you understand that you're limited by the budget approved and allocated by your funding source. And we're constantly asked to do things as efficiently and economically as possible and on the cheap, because we're dealing with people's hard-earned tax money, and we respect that. But sometimes that leaves us shorthanded, not just my office, but also law enforcement agencies with whom I work. And so I do not believe anyone in this room is unwilling to enforce the law and keep us safe. It's just not true.
Well, I would add in there, as long as we're talking about this topic, that as we opened up with these issues of the jail arrest standards, what we can and can't do, again, those are all meant to be temporary, but we have legislation that's looking at making a lot of that permanent. We have legislation, as we talked about earlier, where judges can't require monetary bond. There's legislation being proposed that all the courtrooms in the state should open up on Sunday so that they could call what's advise somebody if they've been arrested, say on a Friday, and they only spend maybe 2 nights in jail, not a 3rd night. Those are expenses that are going to be borne by taxpayers. There's a bill right now that's been introduced in the legislature dealing with the right to quote, peacefully protest, yet it specifically prohibits law enforcement from interfering even if there's property damage or violence, unless it is substantial violence occurring or significant property damage. So that means your business can have a broken window, they can be spray painted on the side of your house. People could go out here on Grand Avenue and block the highway. And although your rights are being infringed upon to be able to move freely or go pick up your kids or go to the doctor or what have you, all we can do is sit on the guardrail and watch. So we, in addition to, the current environment that the DA was talking about, things coming down the pike are making it even more difficult and tying our hands even more when it comes to what our legislators are doing in Denver. There's discussion, although there hasn't been a bill proposed yet, about basically prohibiting school resource officers from being in our school. I can tell you, back to my days at the Glenwood Springs Police Department, we've had school resource officers in our schools for 25 years, if not longer. And they're a valuable asset, one of the greatest programs law enforcement's ever come up with. But yet there are people out there who argue that having a peace officer in a school creates a dangerous environment for their children. I'm not quite sure how having a police officer there to protect your children creates a dangerous environment. But there's laws that are coming down that they want to prohibit that. They're going to tell me and the chief that I cannot assign a deputy or a police officer to a school. And that's something that I think certainly people should be up in arms about. They should be contacting their school board, their superintendent. At a minimum, that should be decided upon by each community and by each school district, not from Denver telling everybody else in the state what to do. And these are just a few examples of what's going on now in a new legislature. We have a long way to go, and there are going to be more things that are quite frankly tying the hands of law enforcement, tying the hands of our district attorney, that are going to affect all of you. So, you know, you could argue that famous phrase that elections have consequences, and truly they do. But these are things that are happening at the Capitol that we have little or no control over from the law enforcement level.
Jen, let me just take note that it's 7:25. We still have 28 people that have written in with questions, and we haven't gotten to the phone calls yet. How would you like to proceed?
So some of those I haven't actually pushed through. So I think you've answered most of those. I think
Okay.
there are a few more that have popped up. And I think you've answered this question a couple of different ways, but I think, I think there's some insistence that that I'm not asking all of the questions. So there's a question about, if we can't lock everyone up, what do we do to protect the people to ensure, especially homeless people, don't commit crimes? And then there's also a question about, a person downtown who's cleaning up bodily functions and cigarettes and marijuana, and concerned about someone who's contagious, not with COVID, and who can fix this, and why is it okay for homeless to continue to break multiple laws a day and not have any repercussions?
So can I address the lockup one? That was a lot of information there, Jen. But the question about why can't we lock everyone up and keep our community safe is, I think we kind of beat that horse to death, and hopefully have explained why that's not practical or possible or even legal. But beyond that, I have to tell you, and I tell everybody this, and maybe Garfield County Jail is different than maybe, the jail in Chicago or the jail in Los Angeles, but most of the people in our jail, most of the people that we deal with in our community that commit crimes, they're not criminals. They've made bad choices in their life. They've made mistakes in their life. They need to be held responsible and pay the consequences for that, and then hopefully move on with productive lives. But they're not criminals. Do we have some serious criminals in our jail? Of course. Do we have people that have that criminal mind that simply say, I don't care who I hurt, what I have to step on, what I have to do to get what I want, and I want it now? Absolutely. But a majority of the people that we deal with in law enforcement, the majority of people that are in my jail right now, really truly aren't what we do call a criminal mindset. They've made bad decisions, and that could be, drug issues and alcohol issues, or even DUI. I'm not dismissing DUI; it's a serious crime. We kill 15,000 people a year in DUI crashes. But again, these are decisions that people have made bad choices in their life, and they can be corrected if they want to be corrected. So it doesn't really jive with the fact that we want to lock everybody up. And if we did lock everybody up, then who's going to be out there, to be able to do whatever it is we need to do in our community. So we hold the ones in jail responsible, the serious violators. We hope we can, through the system, take care of those people that, have made those bad decisions and move on, and have them move on to be productive members of our community.
I'll say a couple things. I don't want to get too far into this because it's already been asked and answered, I think, a couple different times. City of Glenwood Springs is fortunate because we have elected officials here who have allowed and provided for an exorbitant amount of funds on keeping the downtown welcoming and beautiful and clean. Every day, our Parks and Recs people are down there, and the staff members there are subjected to biohazards, probably more than the police officers are. On a regular basis, they're down there cleaning that up every single day, in the early mornings, at night. We spend money on the security forces that somebody talked about earlier, and we've even gone as far as now allocating overtime for the officers that we do have to supplement those security officers. But there is a reference or supposition to somebody being downtown with COVID. I'm not really sure how you would be able to determine that. That's kind of a leap. And there's a lot of controversy in our community about a council decision to enforce masks, or the wearing of masks in the downtown corridor. We've done that, and we've really got a lot of compliance there. We've never had to take any enforcement action. So I do think that speaks to the political will and some of the posture and disposition of all the city resources that we brought to bear to clean that area up or keep it clean. With respect to your discontent about the laws and lock everybody up, I think, as I said in the paper recently, I'd have to refer you to the ballot box, not locally, but statewide. The legislature there imposes these or passes these laws, which are passed down to us. The sheriff, the DA, and I have no choice in what laws we choose to enforce. We are required to enforce all the laws that are on the books. We do have limited discretion there, but just locking everybody up, we're talking about taking people's freedom away. That's a substantial threshold. And so we have to operate, as we said from the beginning, within the confines of the laws that the legislature has given to us.
Okay, the bigger.
So, sure. So Deborah Figueroa was going to add here to the conversation about the homeless situation.
I was just say, for the last 2 years, and obviously COVID made it more difficult, we've been working with other municipalities and the county and the sheriff's office to have conversations about how we can address some of the homeless/mental health issues. There is not any one solution, and every municipality in the entire country is struggling with this. Over the next couple of months, I think we're going to have community conversations around homelessness and what we can do, probably similar to this, with the community about, what we can do. We're working towards funding a detox facility with the county and surrounding communities. We are literally trying to build an infrastructure that hasn't existed before to help homeless people through some of their issues, and hopefully helping house people that can be housed and give people a second chance that can. But there is no perfect answer, and there is no perfect solution. We've struggled with homelessness forever as a human civilization, and we're going to continue to have that struggle.
I would like to add, though, just to make it clear, if you haven't understood what we've been talking about tonight, is there are certain things that people have a right to do. There may have been laws years ago about being drunk in public or being, non-support or loitering. Those have all been declared unconstitutional. They are not crimes. They really fall more into a community responsibility issue. So being homeless, being panhandling, loitering, drunk in public, even mentally ill, unless you can establish you are a danger to yourself or another person, it's not illegal to be mentally ill. Unless you are so intoxicated that you're likely to, die or cause yourself injury, it's not illegal to be intoxicated. The only exception, of course, is driving a car. So all of these things that maybe at one point in our lives were criminal matters are no longer criminal matters. They're community-related issues that the communities have to step up to. And I can tell you, even though my sandbox is criminal, dealing with criminal matters, we are all part of this community. We all participate in these functions that Deborah was talking about, in these meetings, and trying to find solutions to this for the community. But these are not criminal matters in the sense that people have rights called civil rights to choose to be homeless, to choose to walk around in a mentally ill state, as long as they're not a danger.
So I think there's one more question here, and then we may want to, maybe there's a few more questions that have come in. I looked away for a second, and then may want to ask the folks on the phone if they'd like to hit *9. There's a question about enforcement of the mask mandate and why there isn't enforcement for homeless people like everyone else.
Again, I would challenge that perception. Again, we've had a number of security personnel downtown asking people to comply with the mask ordinance. That's a local ordinance, not a state ordinance, and so we're looking for compliance here. Specifically to a person who appears to be homeless, if they don't have a mask, our staff and the security staff that we've contracted with do have a supply of masks, and we've handed them out to these folks. Is a citation the best course of action? Again, that person, that's going to become a burden on, well, number one, society because of public health risks, certainly, but the court system. We bring that person, we issue them a summons. They're going to be asked to appear or directed to appear in the municipal court and see a judge. Oftentimes, violations of that level, people typically don't appear. And even when they do, the consequences aren't such that really want to motivate somebody to comply with the mask ordinance. We can't put them in jail for all the reasons we already discussed. All we can look for is compliance here, and then to continue to educate folks, and I hate to say browbeat them without going to enforcement. That's kind of where we really are. But again, we haven't had a whole lot of pushback on that, and where we're able to contact somebody in that situation, we certainly do.
What changes would you suggest alternatively with keeping in progress and the protections these justice reform changes are for? Alternatively from the changes you clearly don't agree with personally.
I'm going to defer. I've kind of already made my position clear about that, about how that might work, the way I understand it.
Quite hear the whole question.
Like, try again, Jen?
What changes would you suggest alternatively with keeping in progress in the protections these justice reforms changes are for? Alternatively from the changes you clearly don't agree with personally.
Well, you know, and I might defer to the DA, but I would just say that, again, I think I've made position clear. Clearly, in the criminal justice reform system, there are good things. There are things that need to be looked at that have been looked at for years. You know, are these things still crimes or are they not? I mean, quite frankly, they're actually looking at laws that are still on the book regarding, you know, certain marijuana statutes, which now marijuana is, you know, legal in the state of Colorado. So there's a value to criminal justice reform. What concerns us is that law enforcement across the state, particularly that we're discussing, more or less are paying the price, if you will, or being singled out or being blamed or being accused because we're unable to do what the level of criminal justice, you know, can do. So each issue, each bill that gets you know, proposed in the Capitol needs to be looked at, and we have to look at this and say, this is good for us, this is bad for us. We spend a lot of time at the legislature. We testify for and against bills. We work with committees offline. We work with you know, folks from the ACLU and other organizations that, you know, have their interests in mind. And so I can't answer specifically, you know, which ones I like or which ones I oppose. I think it's an evolutionary and continual process to always be looking at our laws, to always be looking at what works and what doesn't work, and what society's priorities are. And again, you know, the simple answer, for example, in Colorado is Colorado decided that they wanted to legalize marijuana. Prior to that, it was illegal. That's what Colorado decided. I have my own personal opinion about that, but as a law enforcement officer, I have to comply with the wishes of the you know, the community. So there's no one or two or simple answers to that. It's just constant progression. Jeff?
Yeah, I think I'd first state the criminal justice reforms that I personally do agree with. And I think even some of my partners here might disagree with me. I personally do agree that body-worn cameras are a good thing. What that allows is transparency with respect to the interactions between the law enforcement officer and the citizen. And so that is a criminal justice reform that has occurred that I do support. I also support that dishonest officers who have been found under an investigation to have a sustained finding of dishonesty or deceit ought not to be police officers, because the police officer has to have an impeccable integrity. So those are the criminal justice reforms that I strongly agree with, and I'm frankly glad that they have happened. The criminal justice reforms I disagree with are more out of my, I guess, personal philosophy about lawmaking. I once heard that the worst thing to hear, the worst 6 words to hear of anybody is, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. A lot of times the person who is from the government to help with some law is a law that is responding to something that happened where that lawmaker lives, rather than taking into consideration the diversity of our state and the diversity of our country. I think many criminal justice reforms were reactions to respond to things that happened in Minneapolis, which were horrible. But the reality is that I have to answer and account for the system to victims of crime. And when the victim hears that a person didn't show up for their court date for the first time, the second time, and the third time, and there's no bench warrant that can be issued, which is in this current bill, I don't know how to account or explain that to a victim. I don't know how to explain and answer that for you. And so that's an example of one of the criminal justice reforms I do disagree with. I do agree that the decriminalization or the diminution of seriousness for certain levels of drugs, you know, we've tried a lot of things with drugs. The legislature has reduced some drug possessions now down to misdemeanors that were felonies. You know, you can say that's a good thing because that prevents a person from being punished for addiction. But there was the other shoe that was never dropped, and that was what funds and what institutions and facilities were created to allow those people to get the treatment they need to deal with the addiction that they have, which in my experience, addiction and use of drugs does result in criminal activity sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And so the one-size-fits-all approach to criminal justice reform to tell Garfield County and our county, Rio Blanco County up in the north, this is what we think you need to be doing for your community. And I haven't heard from anybody to ask me what I think is best for my community. I'm not sure if any of you have heard from anyone from Denver about what they think or what you think about what needs to happen relative to law enforcement and the judicial system in your community. And that's the problem, the separation of what is driving the criminal justice reforms from the reality on the ground. And I think what we're dealing with today is it's only the beginning. And I think that if you studied criminal law, you will find that there was a pendulum that began to swing a long time ago and has continued to swing back and forth, where we try to minimize the punishment and accountability for offenders and focus more on treatment and other rehabilitation, which we're all in favor of if you genuinely want it. And then that pendulum absolutely swings the other direction when people in the community start to feel unsafe and say, what's going on? Why do we feel unsafe in our community now? Why do we see human feces on the sidewalk? Why is there a tent neighborhood occupying an entire city street? Those are questions that are now being asked, and I predict they're going to be asked even more and more and more, and likely we're going to have more situations like we've had recently that prompt discussion like this.
I'll be brief and just add that there was an inference in the question about laws that we don't agree with. It's not a matter of what we agree with and what we don't agree with. Those are laws. We don't really have any say in which ones we choose to enforce, which ones we do not. If there's a law violation, we're obligated to enforce those laws. So there are many laws on the books that I don't agree with, none of which I've alluded to tonight because it's irrelevant. Whatever the laws are that are passed down from the legislature, whether it's body cams or qualified immunity, whatever it might be, that's not for me to decide. We just enforce what is given to us and work it through the process the best that we can.
I think you've answered this, in a couple of different ways, but I think there's a question here about when we've called the police with an event, they tell us they will find the person and inform them that they can no longer welcome. They are no longer welcome to our businesses. They will be trespassing. However, we receive no follow-up to know if they were found and informed or about our message. When they return, they need to be told. It needs to be that the police has told them they can no longer come into our store. Can we get a follow-up from our calls?
The short answer would be yes. Without knowing the specific information, or someone's free to call me and tell me the date and time, and I can find out about that particular event. But generally speaking, when an officer tells you that, my expectation, and it's been my experience here, that the officers are very diligent in reaching out to these folks and relaying that message, if not even then documenting that in an incident report. Not that it's required, but sometimes officers will go the extra step to do that. So I don't know, I'm not suggesting that what you're telling me is not factual. I just don't have enough information to speak on that particular incident. I'm just speaking more in a general term.
And then I think I'll ask this question. Why is this a false Q&A? This is not a Q&A. This is an excuse session for those who have failed our community. And I just want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Fair enough. Understood.
Everybody's entitled to their perception and opinion. We recognize that and defend that.
And then I don't know if you, there are a few people on the phone. So if you're wanting to raise your hand, you can hit *9 and we can take your question. I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand who's on the phone. There is one more question. How do we say thanks to the peace officers trying hard to do the right thing under difficult circumstances?
Well, I certainly appreciate even hearing that. I'd like to say that we don't ever ask for thanks. This is a job that we chose, we signed up for. Who knew what it was going to be like even a year ago? I certainly didn't. But we appreciate people feeling like that, and if you feel compelled to express your thanks, coming by, leaving us an email, checking in with an officer when you see him on the street and thanking him, or whatever that, I think that's more than sufficient. People like to reach out to us on a regular basis. With COVID, it's been very limited, and I have to respect that. But I do personally feel, and I speak on behalf of the department and for most of our officers, that we do feel appreciated in our community. People have come by and they've held signs out in front of the building about backing the badge when that wasn't popular or wasn't cool, because at that time, a lot of people were defund the police and all these kind of things. So I do feel like we have a lot of support from the city organization as an entity, my law enforcement partners in the region, and our community members reach out to us. When I talked about going to civic meetings earlier, I do these pretty frequently, and it's without fail, people talk about how much they appreciate the law enforcement experience or the professionals that we have in our community, where a lot of other communities cannot say that. And so I'm very proud to be here, and I do appreciate you even offering that here in this forum for everybody to hear.
Well, of course, I would echo that, and I would add that even across the country, even in the difficult times, post George Floyd and what was going on this summer, polling after polling after polling showed that, excuse me, 80%, more like 86, 88% of the people across this country supported law enforcement. No, we're not perfect. Yes, we have people in our ranks that, may not be there, and we do what we can to weed them out. And like the district attorney was talking about with regard to truthfulness and getting rid of those folks, I can tell you in that specific bill, I support that 100%, but it's really not a problem in my organization, because if you lie, you're out of here. There's no second chance, third chance, you're terminated. Once you are dishonest, then we can never trust your judgment again. But overall, as far as the gratitude, we know it, it's out there. But you see it off, you see somebody on duty, thank them, pat them on the back, appreciate what you do. I get emails all the time from people in the community thanking me for this deputy helping them do this, thanking this for helping that. And I pass those on, because those are the things, appreciation, value, those are the things that people want most in their job. Money's good, but money is always down there third or fourth. It's the recognition, the appreciation that they do. And in law enforcement, it's particularly difficult. But I think most communities, and I would argue that our community is even a higher percentage than those pollings across our country. We see a lot of support in our community. There's going to be people that don't like us. There's going to be people that want to call in and talk about, abolishing the police or defunding the police and taking those positions. And absolutely, under our Constitution, not only do you have a right to do that, your right to your opinion, a right to that speech, a right to dissent, but we also are in a position where we've sworn to uphold and protect your very rights to do that. So there's always going to be detractors and never going to be, perfect. But I think in Garfield County and in our communities, we have an overwhelming support of people. How many actually take the time to say that? I can't answer that, but I can feel it. I can see it when I go into a restaurant, how many people take the time to thank me and for what my office does. So we live in a good place. We're not in a place where we're being attacked. We're not in a place where we're not appreciated. We're in a good place here in our community.
And then there are a couple more questions that are related to how would you recommend a business conduct themselves to get a customer to leave their place of business? And I think I've been scrolling through the questions. They aren't coming all in order, but I think I have asked most of them, if not all of them, and we apologize for those that we didn't get to.
I do think that we're currently in conversations with the chamber about potentially doing training in this area. I think that might be the best route to go with that question.
I think training is always essential. There's a training that bartenders have to go through, if it's an emphasis for their employer called the TIPS training. And it trains a bartender to know the signs and symptoms of over-serving and not putting that person in danger. And that equips that person to make good decisions relative to how they interact with a customer. I think it would be excellent for us all to rally behind some sort of training to allow tools of dealing with difficult people. We deal with difficult people all the time at our office who are angry, and we just try to empathize with them, but at some point we need some skills to de-escalate the situation. And so I think that's an excellent idea, and I'll be happy to lend some teachers to that effort.
Okay, is that all the questions, Jen?
I think so. I'm going through and just seeing if there are any additional ones that we haven't gotten to that are not more commentary.
Okay, while you're doing that, I just want to take a second to thank the sheriff, thank the district attorney, and of course, thank the chief for all spending tonight with us. Thank you very much. And thank you to the public as well.
You know, this can be difficult, and I certainly appreciate everybody that spent their evening with us tonight. We're not always going to agree, and you might have your own opinions about how things should be done, and I respect that. And I certainly don't expect everybody to come and want to give me a hug or love what we do, but our intentions and our hearts are in the right place. We're part of your community, and again, thank you all for taking an interest in our public safety model here in Glenwood Springs and in Garfield County as a whole. Thank you very much.
I will echo that. Thank you all for taking the time out of your evening and trying to get your answers to your questions and maybe understand a little better some of the pitfalls that we all have to face in the criminal justice system.
I would, not to repeat, but just say thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I have taken notes to the extent I've run one pen out of ink and had to switch because I paid close attention to the questions and perhaps the implied messages sort of entertained through the question. For those who think we're here to offer excuses, you know, I respect that opinion, and I understand maybe that's how you feel. And if our explanation that we have to do our job within the boundaries of the law and the Constitution is an excuse, so be it. But I can tell you that we all carry a burden, and that burden is borne by us voluntarily. We've chosen to be a part of law enforcement and to be a part of the criminal justice system and subject ourselves and the members of our team to the trauma suffered by victims, to be held accountable for problems that we didn't cause or create and perhaps we have no ability to solve. But we gladly do that because we care about you and our community. And that's not going to stop. And so your voices are heard tonight, and I really appreciate you making your voices heard. I've taken really good notes, and I'm going to study what's been said. Criticism is the burden of every leader, and it is also a gift if you look at it that way, and that is criticism can help educate us on how we can do better and expose our blind spots. And so thank you for those folks who even criticized tonight. You're going to help make us better and help us understand where our blind spots are, and we hope to serve you better.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jen.